Hey everybody, Gromlos here with another Warthunder video. Now, I wanted to make the next Warthunder video about the next EC test, but sadly it was pushed back a week, so I had to improvise and come up with another plan. So, since we had Japan vs USSR this weekend, I figured in this video I'm going to fly the Yak-9. Not the Yak-9D or K or anything, mind you, just the normal Yak-9. Now, there's one thing I have to say about the plane first, like I had to do with the LA-5FN. I like Russian planes, I have said so in the past. They are lightweight, have good power to weight ratio and usually a decent to good armament. Just a great mix in maneuverability and energy fighting. I especially like the Lavochkin line, like the LA-5FN for example, but I also like the Yaks. However, one thing that sadly keeps me from flying them more often and making more videos about them is the fact that a great portion of them have a very low battle rating, and the Yak-9 is one of them. The plane used to have a battle rating of 3.3 in simulator battles, which is far too low already and makes the plane mostly fight planes a full year or 2 years older. But a while ago the battle rating got reduced even further to 3.0, leading to the Yak-9 being not just on a lower battle rating than the Yak-1B, but on a lower battle rating than the Bf-109F2 and A6M2, both older by about 1.5 to 2 years. That means if fighting the Germans, the Yak-9 with its current battle rating pretty much can't face a fighter that is newer. Even a Bf-109F4 at battle rating 4.0 is older, and the absolute worst that can happen for a Yak-9 is the 109G2 at 4.0, being pretty much the only plane of at least somewhat similar introduction dates. Now, I consider the Yak-9 to be a good plane, so I simply do not understand why it needs so much help from the battle rating system, and I hope that this video also shows this a little bit. Now, versus the Japanese, the plane will mostly face the A6M2 Zeros, which are on slightly higher battle rating than the Yak-9, and the Hayabusas, as well as the occasional Ki-61 and J2M2 Raiden. Now, the J2M2 Raiden is in the Japanese tree what the MC202 is in the German tree, that one plane that is also horribly undertiered. However, they are also often used wrong as a turn fighter, which massively reduces the threat they can pose, and do pose when used correctly. Now, the primary opponent of the Yak-9 in Warthunder in this matchup, the A6M20 and Hayabusas, are massively inferior to the Yak-9, as one would expect from fighters that are close to 2 years older. Still, it seems to me from what I have heard and seen both in-game and on the forums that this matchup gives many pilots a lot of trouble when flying planes like the Yak, so I figured maybe this video will help a bit in this regard as well. So, let me give you a quick overview of the Yak-9 before we look at it in a battle. The plane has a roughly 1200 horsepower Klimov 105 BF engine. The engine is a development of the earlier M105 engines and rates in critical altitude to gain more performance overall. Now, Russian planes do have a reputation of having bad high altitude performance, though at the beginning of the war the M105's critical altitude, the altitude above which it will no longer be able to produce full power, was comparable to other nations' primary inline engines at the time. Though, as it was realized that the vast majority of the fighting on the Eastern Front took place at low altitude, the improved M105PF traded in its high altitude performance for better low altitude performance. Now, you don't get war emergency power on the Yak-9, unlike planes with earlier M105 engines. However, the engine produces more power on military power than earlier M105s did on war emergency power, and you won't overheat. The Yak-9 is, like most Soviet fighters, pretty light, so it has a good power to weight ratio and it is decently fast and maneuverable. Though in this matchup you want to avoid maneuvering as much as possible and keep your speed up as much as possible. If you can do that, Zeros will have a very hard time against this plane, since they are simply not fast enough. The armament is mediocre, a 20mm cannon and a 50 caliber machine gun, both with a somewhat limited ammo supply. However, the cannon does good damage when it hits with high explosive rounds, which is why I would suggest to use the ground target belts in this plane, as it has the largest amount of HE rounds in it. Well, that's a quick overview of the plane. Let's take a look in a fight in it. This one takes place at the Kalkin-Gol map. I just arrived at a friendly objective coming from the airport when I can, assisted by some AA fire, spot an enemy plane, a captured Corsair followed by Yak-1B, and seeing no other targets at this time, I come around for a possible attack. As I do so, the F4U also comes around and flies my way, and I fire a deflection shot as it passes in front of me, and I keep going up a bit while looking back to see what my shots did and what the Corsair is doing. I don't want to waste energy turning straight after it, but it seems the Corsair is damaged and making a run for it. I'm not sure though if I can catch up to it, as I'm not sure how fast the Corsair was when it came past me. And it also seems other planes are going after the Corsair as well, and I want to avoid the lemming train. And for good reason. As soon as I look back I can spot another enemy plane behind us. So I pull up in a bit of a mix between a loop and a canopy roll to displace my flight path a bit to the right, as the enemy plane was behind me a bit to the right, and loop down in behind the newcomer, which turns out to be a J2M2 Raiden, a dangerous plane and very fast, especially considering that it has the same battle rating than a A6M20 in Warthunder, but not as good of a turn fighter as other Japanese planes, so it needs to keep its speed up as well to be truly effective. The Raiden, however, came up from lower altitude, while I still have lots of speed from my diving after the Corsair, so I can close in on the Raid fast and open fire. I get a few hits and something large fell off the enemy plane, and when I take a closer look at what it was, well, that's new. At this time I had not noticed that the enemy plane is already destroyed, so I close in again and fire another burst just to make sure. Then I go up in a bit of a climbing turn, regaining some altitude and pointing the nose back towards where I can see some AA fire. Climbing of course slows me down a bit, but I have the necessary altitude now to build up enough speed fast to outrun everything I can't outturn in this matchup. And speaking of things I can outturn, another captured Corsair shows up coming from my left and passing me. It looks to me at first that the Corsair wants to slot in behind me, so I turn around quickly. It seems though that the Corsair is going for someone else on slightly higher altitude when I have turned around. So I bring my nose around to see if I can help out. There are a few other planes in this fight as well now. I can see a B-39 attacking another enemy plane I can't identify yet, and it looks like the Yak-9 is going after the Corsair now. I'm just about to break off, as it seems the friendly team has the upper hand, when I can see another enemy plane attacking the Yak-1. So instead I close in on this new plane to help the Yak-1. It's a Zero, and as I get in range I fire a quick burst, but I don't lead quite enough and I miss. The Zero has not noticed me yet though, so I can line up another shot, and this time I hit the Zero's wing and it goes down. I look back to check my 6, but in the low light conditions I almost miss another enemy plane coming in behind me, but I manage to evade just in time, and the attacker, a Raiden, overshoots and pulls up after that. After overshooting, the Raiden turns around back towards me, and I pull up towards him. He can't turn around quick enough to slot in back behind me though, and ends up in front of me. The Raiden starts to dive away, and I go after it. Now, by this point I'm almost out of cannon ammo, and I want to save up what little I have left for a good shot, so I only fire short bursts of 50 caliber machine guns every now and then to hopefully get the Raiden to maneuver. Now, the Raiden with its 1800 horsepower engine is quite a bit faster than my Yak-9, but the defensive maneuvers slow him down while I try to fly as smooth as possible to keep speed up, and so I can slowly catch up. Meanwhile, the F4U I hit in the very beginning finally goes down, I guess an emergency landing at the airfield. Now, even though I don't actually expect to do any damage with my short machine gun bursts, I get lucky and eventually hit the Raiden's fuel tank and set it on fire, so I don't even need to use the cannon. I follow the Raiden a bit longer in case I have to put some more fire into it to make it go down, but that, as it turns out, will not be necessary. So I pull up to trade my speed back for altitude. Now, I'm almost out of ammo, but there is still a fight directly in front of me, so I figure maybe I can use my last ammo to help a teammate out before I have to fly back to the airfield to get some more ammo. As I get closer to the fight, I can spot a Yak-1 pass below me, and I attack what appears to be a Zero and a Hayabusa, so I go up into a wing over towards them to attack. I dive towards the enemy planes and slot in behind the Hayabusa, and as I get close enough I open fire, but my aim isn't very good and I don't get quite enough hits to take the Hayabusa out. Now, however, I wasted the last of my cannon ammo and I'm almost out of machine gun ammo too, so I decide it is time to return to base. The Hayabusa tries to climb after me, but as I turn towards base and dive away, I can quickly get up to my plane's top speed before I level out, which is significantly higher than the top speed of a Hayabusa or a Zero, so I simply fly away. I rearm at the airfield and make my way back towards the fight after that. However, as I arrive back there, there is only one friendly enemy plane left, an LA-5. A second LA-5 was sitting at the airfield but never made it off the runway. The enemy team has about 4 to 5 planes left at this point. After a bit I do spot 2 planes in the distance following each other, and I at first assume they're both enemy and sticking together, and I close in on the 2 hoping for a surprise attack on the rear one. As I get closer though, it turns out that the one in front is actually the friendly LA-5 and under attack by a Hayabusa. Well, even better. The LA-5 goes up and loops around and then dives back down, and the Hayabusa follows. I can see a second enemy plane a bit further away, but for now I focus on the Hayabusa since it is on the LA-5 already. I want to get a little bit closer to it before I open fire, and the LA-5 is out of effective fire range of the Hayabusa quickly in its dive. Now the Hayabusa turns to the left instead of following the LA-5 further. I'm not sure if he has spotted me, but if he has seen me he is not doing any tight turns, maybe out of fear to rip his wings at those speeds. I fire a deflection shot, get a good hit, and the Hayabusa goes down. Now I have lots of speed to turn back into altitude, so I go back up to look for other enemy planes. I know there was at least one nearby just a moment earlier. Now after climbing back up to altitude I can see a plane in the distance in the direction of our airfield, on slightly higher altitude. I assumed that this is the LA-5 since I saw it flying in that direction, so for now I fly that way too. But as I look around I can see some AA fire coming from the ground forces behind me. Now, with me and the LA-5 being the only friendly planes up and not close enough to that base, that AA has to indicate an enemy plane, maybe more and hopefully on lower altitude, so I come around and start to fly that way. But I don't get very far. I soon notice an enemy plane coming in from the right, a Zero, and slotting in behind me. Now, since I know the LA-5 still has to be near me, I just point the nose down a bit, gain distance and call for assistance. And indeed the LA-5 comes in pretty soon, and the enemy planes, it's more than one by now, have to break off. I take another close look behind me to make sure no plane is following me directly, since it is pretty hard to see from here which plane is the LA-5. But nobody is following me, and since none is, I can turn around pretty aggressively and go on the offensive again. I come around and gain some altitude in doing so, which I then turn back into speed as I fly towards the planes fighting by pointing the nose down. Now I expect the LA-5 to be the highest one of those planes I can see, and it is, and the plane I fly towards turns out to be a Zero attacking the LA-5. Now as I get closer and into fire range, I fire a burst as I get in range, and I get a few hits, but not enough to take the plane out, and then use my speed to go up again. Now as I look to the left I see a Zero below me, which I at this point assume is the Zero I just attacked, since that one flew in that direction as well, and I am a bit surprised how low it is. That turns out to be wrong though, it's another Zero on lower altitude, the one I attacked had a green camera. Anyway, since the Zero is that low I have a good energy advantage over it, and I decide to attack it pretty aggressively. The Zero turned into me and I started to climb above it, since I was in a much higher energy state, to attack it from above. However, the Zero I actually attacked first was on higher altitude than the white one, and able to climb after me, together with a third enemy plane, and they attack. So the same deal as before, let's just dive away and ask for help from the LA-5. Again, I'm quickly out of range of the 2 attacking planes and gaining distance from them, and as I look back again, it seems they indeed broke off, as the LA-5 took the opportunity to attack again. And again, I keep an eye on them a bit longer to make sure I am clear and I can turn around aggressively to attack the enemy planes again, as they are distracted by the LA-5. As before, I gain some altitude as I turn around in the vertical, and then trade that altitude back into speed as I descend back towards the enemy planes, so I can attack them while being too fast for them to follow me after the attack. And I pretty quickly reach and surpass the maximum level speed of a Zero or Hayabusa as I get closer. And they of course won't be at their maximum speed at the moment as they are maneuvering. Now, as I close in on the plane I assume is attacking the LA-5, I can see a Zero pass me to my left. But for now I want to go after the plane that is on the LA-5 first. Sadly, the LA-5 apparently stalls and crashes during evasive maneuvers before I can get there. I can however line up and get a quick burst on the Hayabusa that was attacking the LA-5. Again I get a hit but no real damage. After the attack I go up in a wide climbing turn and keep an eye on the Hayabusa to get above it and dive back down on it to attack. I know the other 2 enemy planes are still behind me, but they were lower and can't catch up to me as I dive towards the Hayabusa. I close in on the Hayabusa, but he sees me coming and turns to the left, and I can't follow any kind of turn in this situation, since anything but an attack in a pretty straight line would threaten to slow me down enough for the other 2 fighters to catch up, so I break off and go back up again. I go into a climbing turn to get above the enemy planes. I can see 2 Zeros below me coming my way, but I lost sight on the Hayabusa. As the Zeros are about to get below me, I pull straight up to gain some extra altitude and then come around to attack them directly from above. As I come around though, I can still see the white Zero and choose it as a target, but I've lost sight on the green one and the Hayabusa. The Zero is pulling up towards me and it's gonna end up being a head-on, but I'm committed now and I fire a burst as the Zero passes me. Again, I get a hit, but not enough. Now, I would have a good energy advantage over this Zero now and I could easily get above it again, but I have lost sight on the other 2 enemy fighters, so I figure it's time to break off a bit, break contact and hopefully get a better opportunity later. I am the last fighter on my team after all. So I dive down and fly away towards my base till I break contact and then turn around back towards the enemy planes. As I come back, I find a single enemy plane on slightly higher altitude than me and I move towards it to attack, hoping for a surprise attack. But the enemy plane, a Zero, spots me and turns around towards me. Now I am at the moment flying at slightly higher speed than top speed of a Zero, and the Zero turned around pretty tight towards me, so I know the Zero is much slower at this point than I am, and I am at the higher energy state. So I just evade a head-on and go straight up as soon as the Zero passes me and turns around, and I'm quickly climbing above it and get ready to turn around to attack. Sadly, the clouds spoil my plan and I run into the cloud cover and lose sight on the Zero. I turn around and dive back down and hope that I can find the Zero again when I get out of the cloud cover, but as I get out of the clouds I can't find the Zero anymore, and I dive down a bit too much. As I level out I can find it again close to the clouds, but there's a second Zero as well now. And I don't know how fast the second one is. I still think I have enough of an edge in speed to fight them in theory, but I can't fight them here, at least not in the vertical, because I will keep running into the clouds and losing sight on the target, as I just did. So I dive away and hope I can get them into a better position, or even better separate them. As I dive away and fly towards my base, one of the Zeros is following me, though I at this point actually think that it is a Hayabusa, but I lose sight on the other 2 enemy fighters, so I hope I can go on the offensive soon again against only 1 plane. The plane behind me though starts trailing smoke pretty soon, making clear that the other 2 are most likely on their way. So if I have to fight all 3 and I'm already flying towards my base, I figure I might as well fight there and get some help from the AA. So I keep flying away while climbing a bit. Now, about that climbing, some might point out that you should not climb with a Zero or Hayabusa, and you should of course not, but I'm not climbing with them. A Zero climbs as well as it does, because with its light weight and low wing loading it can sustain a higher angle when climbing. However, the plane is still slower than my Yak-9, so as long as I stay above the top speed of the Zero and the Zero is following me directly at the same angle, I climb faster. So, at a low enough angle at high enough speed, I outrun and outclimb a Zero at the same time. The Zero of course just needs to put the nose up and climb at a higher angle to climb faster, but that will slow it down. Now, as I reach the airbase, I start to go on the offensive again. The plane behind me is on a lower energy state than I am. It's slower and lighter and on a lower altitude too, but it's behind me, so I need to turn around while keeping that edge in energy state. If I just climb straight up, a Zero might be able to catch you, since it can keep its nose pointed up longer. If you turn around too tight, you lose too much energy. So you want to make sure that you have enough separation from the enemy plane and turn around into vertical, not too slow, but not too fast either. I'm a bit sloppy here, as I expect a Hayabusa, not a Zero. Now I trade some speed for altitude as I turn around, and then build up speed again as I dive towards the enemy plane, which is losing speed as it climbs towards me. So I get faster as we approach each other, and the enemy gets slower, so I have a nice energy advantage again after we merge despite me turning around, and I go straight up as we pass each other. As I have said, I was a bit sloppy as I turned around and lost a bit too much energy, as I was expecting a Hayabusa, so while I can outclimb the Zero without a problem, he can keep the nose up long enough to fire a burst, but does no serious damage. Now I come around and dive back towards the Zero as it runs out of speed. I try to get a shot at the Zero, but I notice that I won't be able to get the nose pulled up fast enough, and I turn out of the way and pull up again. Since I could build up a decent amount of speed in the dive while the Zero was still pretty slow, I can get more of an altitude advantage this time. And the Zero ends up quite a distance below me, so I dive down to attack again. Now, after getting an energy advantage over a Zero, it is important to be careful when attacking it to not overdo it when maneuvering to get a shot. The Zero is well known for being an amazing energy vampire. While I have much more energy than the Zero at the moment and can keep it up without a problem in the vertical, the super lightweight Zero loses much less energy in a turn than even the also somewhat lightweight Yak-9. So if the Zero turns out of the way and you turn after it to try to get a shot anyway, even if it's just for a little bit, the Zero equalizes some of the energy difference. Do that a few times and the Zero suddenly has the advantage again. So I try to predict where the enemy plane will end up as much as possible when diving down on it, and if it turns out of the way of an attack, I'll just go back up again without trying to turn tight after a Zero to get a shot. A few seconds of pulling hard in a turn can eliminate your entire advantage, and that is something I want to avoid, especially since I expect the other two enemy planes to show up soon. That was the whole point of coming here after all. And speaking of, the Hayabusa arrived climbing after me as I went up after attack on the Zero. The Hayabusa doesn't quite have the speed to climb after me, but I don't have enough vertical separation to go on the offensive against it yet either, so I dive away towards the airbase to get some separation from the newcomer. In the dive I'm quickly above my top speed and I can level out again. My speed will now slowly drop down till it hits my straight line top speed, which is much higher than that of a Zero or a Hayabusa, so they can't follow. Just don't make the mistake in such a situation to dive 90 degrees directly towards the ground, and then doing a 90-degree pull out directly over the ground. Just flying straight down will not get you horizontal separation from the enemy plane, just vertical separation, also known as altitude advantage for the enemy plane, and a tight pull out over the ground will cost you some of the speed you build up in the dive, and the enemy plane now has an altitude advantage it can use to fly faster than level speed and catch back up to you. Something to keep in mind. Now I can see the Hayabusa on slightly higher altitude to my left and another plane on slightly lower altitude more to my front. Since the Hayabusa seems to move away, I move towards the target to my front to attack it, but the Zero shows up again from the right. Again activating smoke to show the other enemies its position and mine, but I still have a large energy advantage over the Zero, so I can just climb above it easily, and the other two are far enough away that I can at least get one attack in before they arrive. I wait for the Zero to run out of speed and then come around to attack. I waited a bit too long to turn around though. The optimum would be to time it in such a way that you catch the enemy plane just when it runs out of speed and can't maneuver. I'm a bit too late, so the Zero could speed up a bit again and pull up. I fire a burst and get a hit, but not enough to take the Zero out, and now I am out of cannon ammo. Since I pulled a bit on the stick to get the shot, I don't go straight up right away to get a feeling for the speed difference now, but it's still pretty high, so I go back up. Now the Zero turned its smoke off for a second, but then back on, maybe indicating another plane nearby, but I can only see one in the distance and it is too far away to be a threat yet. I can't see the third one though at this point, but I have a good opportunity to attack the Zero, so I dive on it again. And this time I get a few good hits with the machine gun and take the Zero out. At the same time I hear some cannon fire though. The second Zero attacked just as I attacked the Zero, but missed this attack. The Zero isn't following me down though, so I go into a climbing turn. I at first plan on gaining some altitude and flying towards the Zero again, but I can also see some AA fire more towards my front, and that looks lower, so I fly that way, looking for the second enemy plane as this might be lower than the Zero. The enemy fighter spots me first though, and is coming in from below and behind. Now he is lower, but I am not 100% sure about his speed at this point, and I am also close to the cloud cover again, so I don't want to go vertical here, and instead I dive away again. And again being out of range of the Hayabusa in no time, and looking back for an opportunity to attack. The Hayabusa at first seems to directly follow me, and I just want to build up some separation to have enough space to turn around and attack, as I have done earlier. But the next time I look back, it seems the Hayabusa is not directly following me anymore, but instead is following the length of the runway to my left, which gives me an opportunity to attack. Though I have to be careful to keep my speed up, as I am on somewhat low altitude now, and the Zero is still around as well. I get above the Hayabusa and turn towards it. The Hayabusa turns around as I fly towards it, and is flying away now, so I can come in behind him. Since I am very low on ammo though, I want to only take good close range shots, so I wait a bit too long to press the trigger as I close in on the Hayabusa, and he turns out of the way before I open fire. Here, with the Zero still being around and at this low altitude, I can most certainly not turn after the Hayabusa or waste any speed in any way. So I just continue straight at high speed and start to climb to get back some altitude and get into a better position to attack from. I go into a wide loop, first going up pretty high while still keeping an eye on the Hayabusa, and then looping around and going back down to attack it again. This time I approach the Hayabusa from the front though, and I have no interest in a head-on with only one machine gun, even though the Hayabusa has only one more than that. But he turns to my left and I can fire a quick burst at him. But I miss, and now I am almost out of ammo for the machine gun as well. I have only a few rounds left, hardly enough to fight two planes with, though I can't see the Zero at the moment, only the Hayabusa. But I hope I might still be able to get at least one of them out of the fight with a few lucky hits, and then maybe get an opportunity to land and rearm. Now I close in and fire another burst at the Hayabusa at my next pass, but again I don't get a hit. And now I notice another problem. I'm running out of fuel also, so I will have to land sooner rather than later, so I have to think about how best to do that. But before I can think about that anymore, I hear another plane approaching. The Zero is finally back again and coming in from behind. So I have to dive away again and build up some speed, as I don't know how fast the Zero was when it came in. But he most likely came in from altitude with a good amount of speed, so again I speed up by diving down, but not too steep, and then level out. Now my speed will slowly drop down to my top level speed, but the Zero speed will drop faster, and it will drop down to its top level speed, which is lower. The Zero is falling back, but firing machine guns on long range, maybe to get me to turn, which I don't do, and I am quickly out of range. Now I have the problem that I have only 1 minute fuel left though, so I have to land. I have to turn around, which I don't want to do. Conveniently though, I'm just running into the level border, so I don't actually have to turn around. I will get turned around when I cross the level border. Now immediately after that I turn to the right to get to the runway as fast as possible, both to get there before I run out of fuel and to get there before the enemy Zero catches up. Though it turns out the Zero moved back towards its base and does not follow me, but I don't know that yet. Still, with seconds of fuel left and enemy planes around, I have no time for pretty proper landing approaches. Thankfully I don't care much about those anyway. I fly with top speed all the way towards the runway and then simply slow down to landing speed with a few tight turns. I land and refuel and rearm the plane. Now I go back up after that to look for the enemy planes again, but I can't find them in time, and the game ends shortly after that without further action, so this is it for this fight. Well, as I've said, there were two reasons for doing this Yak-9 video. First, I hope it might help some to better deal with planes like the Zero in a faster but less maneuverable plane, as this is something that seems to give a lot of people trouble. But I also hope that it showcases how difficult it can be even for multiple planes to deal with one plane that is 1 to 2 years newer and much faster, and therefore how much of a problem it is if some planes, like this Yak-9, basically only meet opponents that are 1 to 2 years older thanks to its battle rating, while never having to deal with opponents that are newer itself. Now, there are of course examples for that in other tech trees as well. The already mentioned J2M2 Raiden at battle rating of 3.3 is basically in the same boat as well, and also much newer and much faster than most of its opposition it will face. That is especially true versus the British, which at this battle rating have the Mark IIB Spitfires. However, the J2M2 Raiden is an exception from the rule in its tech tree, while the Yak-9 is more the rule in its tech tree. And yes, both those examples, the Yak-9 versus the Japanese, as well as the Raiden versus British, often don't actually do that well, which of course then leads to the good old statistics showing that the planes are feeling themselves at their battle ratings. but that is simply because they are both in those matchups very often used wrong as turn fighters when that is the last thing you should do. Yeah, sure, you can turn fight a Bf-109 in your Yak-9, but against the Japanese you just don't want to do that. And yeah, sure, you can turn fight a Mustang or a Thunderbolt in your Raiden, but if you face low-tier Spitfires, that just means throwing away your biggest advantage and play towards the opponent's greatest strengths. And that is why the good old statistics are completely useless when it comes to deciding if battle ratings are good or not, as has been pointed out many times before. Well, and having said that, this is it for this video. As always, I hope it was entertaining, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.